Welcome to From the Quarries. Tonight's video was the third place getter in our recent YouTube poll, and it is the sack of the Masonic Temple in Jersey by the Nazis in 1941. It was written by Brother Dennis G. Perrin, the Provincial Grand Secretary of Jersey. It's quite a straightforward historical account of the events that occurred in Jersey during the war, and as such is a little bit different to our normal From the Quarries fare. I hope you enjoy it.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's presentation, From the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore.
Jersey is the largest of the Channel Islands, roughly rectangular in shape and covering an area of about 45 square miles. It is the most southerly of the British Isles, being situated about 160 kilometres to the southwest of England within sight of the French coast of Normandy, and the nearest point is only 12 miles from France. In the year 933 AD, Jersey was annexed with the other neighbouring Channel Islands to the Duchy of Normandy. In 1066 AD, when William, Duke of Normandy, became King of England, the island became British, and has remained proudly so ever since. The common language in Jersey is English, and its currency is sterling. The Channel Islands, and particularly Jersey, being so close to continental Europe, have always been exposed to raids and invasion. Therefore, from the early days, there were usually small garrisons of British Army stationed there. During the Napoleonic Wars, the garrisons were increased and the fortifications strengthened. Whereas World War I treated the islands comparatively lightly, disaster came with the Second World War. From 1940 to 1945, the Channel Islands were occupied by German forces, and many adults not Jersey-born, were deported to internment camps in Europe. For those who remained, it was a long period of hardship, isolation, and frustration. Speculative Freemasonry came to Jersey through the military garrisons stationed there, who happened to be in possession of travelling warrants, enabling them to meet together. But they made no real impact, as military lodges were not permitted to initiate local inhabitants, and it was not until 1765 that the first lodge in Jersey was formed. By the time of the Union in 1813, there were traces of at least 16 military lodges in Jersey and 3 local lodges. 2 of those, Yarborough Lodge, number 244, and the Duke of Normandy Lodge, number 245, still survive. Before the building of the present Masonic Lodge, all the local lodges could meet on premises to be used for halls, whereas the military lodges met in the castles and barracks in which the garrisons were stationed. Eventually, a suitable site was found fit for Masonic purposes only, and the foundation stone was laid with great public procession and much pomp and ceremony on the 17th of December, 1862. Within 14 months of the laying of the foundation stone, the building comprising the temple, which is large enough to seat 150 in comfort, together with an equally large dining room, a chapter room, and several smaller rooms, plus a library, museum, and committee rooms, was ready for consecration. Because the total membership of all the Masonic bodies did not number more than 120, it shows great courage and foresight on the part of the brethren concerned to build a Masonic whole so far in excess of the needs of their day. During the period from the consecration in 1864 to the outbreak of World War II in 1939, the interior of the temple and the library and museum had been furnished to a very high standard. The museum housed a splendid collection of old seals, the famous Von Berg collection of silver and gold Masonic jewels, some made by Thomas Harper, a prominent jeweller and medallist and Deputy Grand Master of the Ancients, the Vacher Masonic Collection, a large number of valuable Masonic books, pre-union certificates, warrants and Masonic memorabilia, portraits in oils, and silken embroidered banners of the various lodges and orders operating in the province decorated the walls. It was on this beautifully appointed building that soon after the German occupation of the Channel Islands in 1940, disaster struck. The visit of the SA troops from France was preparatory to the arrival of a special squad of professional wreckers who had been sent from Berlin. At 8 a.m. on the morning of Monday the 27th of January 1941, 30 Germans in military uniforms marched up Stopford Road, entered the building and commenced their operation of destruction. Later in the day, the original 30 were joined by another detachment, so there were as many as 65 men on the premises. During the operation, they were visited by many of the higher officers of the German headquarters staff. Books and smaller articles were stowed into large packing cases, and 3 3-ton lorries were seen to be dispatched, after which the furniture was loaded loosely on other lorries. They included the magnificent master's chair, 2 warden's chairs and other state chairs, the pedestals, the columns B and J, kneeling stools, tracing boards, banners, carpets, curtains, etc., etc. Even the 1914 to 1918 War Memorial, commemorating brethren who had made the supreme sacrifice in that war, and which had been erected on the southwest wall of the temple, was ripped out and has never been recovered. The senseless savagery of the wrecking squad is, however, better exemplified by their work of wanton destruction in the library and museum. There, not only were the whole of the contents of dozens of showcases taken away, but most of the mahogany cases themselves were smashed, together with picture frames from which portraits in oils and other pictures had been ripped out and thrown onto a rubbish heap in the caretaker's garden. During the time that the ransacking of the building was in progress, a huge bonfire was kept alight in the garden and fed with papers and other items, but it is quite impossible to know what documents and records were destroyed in that way. The work of destruction took 2 full days. The items were loaded onto lorries and taken to St. Helier harbour, shipped to France on the SS Holland, and thence to Berlin. After the sack had been completed, the Gestapo closed and locked all the doors in the building and replaced their seals. For the next few months, frequent visits were made to make certain that the seals remained intact, as some of the rooms had not been stripped entirely of some of the domestic furniture, tables, chairs, cutlery, glass, and linen, etc. Soon afterwards, the order came for the compulsory liquidation and proscription of all those clubs, associations, and societies which the Germans classified as being secret and subversive. They included the Freemasons, the Salvation Army, the Girl Guides, the Boy Scouts, the Rotarians, and others. But the Ancient Order of Foresters was exempt, presumably because the occupying authorities thought they were engaged in conservation, and hence were rendering an essential service at a time when the island was desperate for all forms of fuel. For the remainder of the occupation, the Germans used the temple as a liquor store, and, at the liberation, it was found to contain thousands of empty bottles and much broken glass, as well as pieces of smashed furniture which the wreckers of 1941 had not even bothered to burn. The looting of the Masonic halls in Jersey and Guernsey was an integral part of the machinery of Nazi anti-Masonic propaganda, as the articles in the newspapers referred to show quite clearly. The articles were aimed to prove that Freemasons, in close alliance with international Jewry, were fostering and deliberately expanding British world power. They contained such statements as, "The mystic darkness of Freemasonry has ceased to be a darkness long since. These secrets have been brought to light since 1933. The intrigues of lodges have come to an end. It is all the more instructive when the world, as especially we Germans, are now being shown that the entire Freemasonry is an organisation created and expanded deliberately by England, fostering the ultimate aim of promoting and strengthening British world power. The close alliance with international Jewry was the safest way to obtain this. The instructive show, which has now been opened in Berlin by order of Reichsleiter Alfred Rosenberg, is based on the comprehensive Masonic material originating from the lodges of the British island of Jersey. And we now stand in the Holy of Holies, the great temple of the Lodge of Jersey, created here in the original, showing the seat of the Master of the Lodge, his deputy, and of his assistant. In front of the altar with the Bible and the Master's hammer, and before it the Ark of the Covenant. The long-awaited liberation of the Channel Islands took place on the 9th of May 1945, amid the greatest rejoicing the islands have ever known. One of the officers of the relieving British force brought a letter from the Most Worshipful the Grand Master, the Earl of Harewood. Addressed to the brethren of the province of Jersey, it welcomed their liberation. That prompt fraternal greeting must have given great pleasure, and was to act as a stimulus to all those on whose shoulders would fall the massive burden of rehabilitation, refurbishment, and re-establishment of Freemasonry in the province. The provincial Grand Master, as well as his deputy, both of whom had remained in the island during the occupation, and many senior Freemasons with them, had died. The main burden of restoration and reorganisation fell to 5 grand officers, all well past middle age, and whose health had not exactly benefited from the rigours of the occupation. However, in less than a month of the liberation, they were able to report to the Grand Secretary at Freemasons' Hall in London, and one paragraph in that report gives examples of their problems. You will note from our brief report that our position is without precedent. We are without a Provincial Grand Master or a Deputy Provincial Grand Master, and without any lodge warrants, these having been taken away by the Germans. Also, we have failed to pay any dues for 5 years. They had some difficulty in gaining access to the Masonic Hall, which, owing to the laws forced through the Jersey States by the occupying power, was no longer Masonic property. However, in due course the red tape was cut, and on the 19th of July 1945, Worshipful Brother George Knocker, who was in charge of the rehabilitation and restoration, was able to report, "I gained access to the building and was able to take stock of the conditions. Empty and broken picture frames littered every part of every room. Broken glass, waste paper, splintered wood, torn and shredded regalia, broken and smashed wands, empty bottles, smashed and battered showcases, broken and damaged lockers and desks, etc., etc." Most of what was needed to resume operations was improvised, and even that was not easy, as the shortage of materials either for furniture or regalia was worse on the island than in England. Proper furniture took a long time to provide, and makeshifts had to be found. Regalia was even more difficult, as most of the brethren had kept theirs in lockers in an anteroom, and they were looted and destroyed by the wreckers in 1941. Nearly all the aprons had to be improvised by painting on any suitable material, and they were used for several months. In spite of all difficulties, the first meeting of the Provincial Grand Lodge was held on the 16th of August 1945, just 1 month after the building had been returned to the Masonic authorities in Jersey. The first item was to announce that the minutes of the last annual communication, held on the 12th of October 1939, were missing, believed looted. The brethren then stood to honour those brethren who had passed away or given their lives during the war, and it is of interest to note that the collection taken at the end of that meeting was for the Samaritan Fund of the Royal Masonic Hospital, and not for the restoration of the temple, as one might well have expected. By September, all the lodges had commenced their regular meetings by virtue of dispensation from the Most Worshipful the Grand Master, empowering them to work in the absence of their warrants, all of which were missing and none of which have ever been recovered. In April 1946, the Lieutenant Governor of Jersey received a letter from the Office of the Military Government in Germany to the effect that 25 cases containing Masonic property looted from Jersey and Guernsey had been found. The cases were eventually returned to Jersey, minus 3 which were stolen in transit. Those cases contained mainly documents and books which the Nazis had acquired from several sources, including 240 volumes from the Jersey Masonic Library, plus a large number of minute books and records of the Provincial Grand Lodge, as well as other Masonic orders in the islands. Unfortunately, there was no china, glass, regalia, or jewels. In each case, including those containing much rubbish, was a printed card recording that the contents had been seized by order of Reichsleiter Alfred Rosenberg. Efforts have continued to try to discover what happened to all the other material which was looted, but without success, and the hope that any of it will ever be recovered has faded. By dint of sustained hard work and the tremendous support and loyalty of so many Masonic friends, the temple in Jersey has been restored to a style and beauty even greater than its splendour of 1939, and Freemasonry continues to flourish. Long may Freemasonry flourish in the Channel Islands, is the earnest wish and aim of all members of the craft wherever they may be, for their support has created this strengthened revival following those dark days between 1939 and 1945.